Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be another in my RHCSA practice session series where I'm going to be looking at the objective configure time service clients within the deploy, configure, and maintain systems objective list. Remember, these videos aren't necessarily intended to be authoritative information, but I do try to make the information accurate. Rather, these are just examples of how I would prepare for these objectives should I be preparing for the RHCSA exam. Before we dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video and also invite everyone to click like on the video if you found it useful and enjoyed it, as well as if you have not subscribed yet, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be notified of when new content comes available. So without further ado, let's jump into configuring time service clients. So configure time service clients is going to be about the chronyd service. In earlier versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, so RHEL 7 and earlier, I believe the service that was used for network time protocol is actually going to be the ntp.d service. But I know for RHEL 8, instead the chronyd service is going to be used. And we're going to look at using chronyc as well as using timedatectl and as also looking at a command named tzselect that we'll use for being able to find some time zones. So for chronyc, that is the command that's primarily used to interact with the chronyd service. You can also do some stuff with timedatectl as well. And I don't particularly have a preference to either of them. I'm probably, I say that, but I'm probably a little bit more partial to timedatectl just because I find it a little bit more straightforward than chronyc, but both of them are of use for you. Chronyc is something that you can run just as like individual commands, such as I could do chronyc sources to see my current NTP sources, or you can run it in an interactive shell. So I can just type chronyc and that'll give me the shell for chrony. And then you can do sources. You can also type help there to be able to get some commands, which is something, quite frankly, I do often for chronyc, just because it's not something that I touch all the time. And there are other things that can be configured with this, especially if you are actually running an NTP server. You'd probably be using chronyc far more to do configuration and such of the chronyd service. However, for the exam, the objective is to configure time service clients. So we're not having to configure an NTP server, and quite frankly, just kind of in the real world, you're generally not having to do much with the client side configuration for NTP other than maybe setting the time zone, or telling it specifically which NTP service you want to use, or possibly if there's some type of major time skew, you might need to change the system clock to get it pretty close to what accurate time is, so that way NTP can get synchronized and keep everything in the proper time. So speaking of that, if we did want to add or remove NTP servers from what's being used, what we would want to do is go into the etc directory, and we would want to edit the chrony.conf file. So if I were to do sudo vi chrony.conf, I got the sudo password on the first try. Means this will be a good video. If you've watched several of my RHCSA videos, you'll know that I often fat finger my sudo password on my little lab VMs here, and it's kind of a running joke, or at least running joke for me. Now, this pool directive is where we dictate the NTP servers that we want to use. So if you needed to change this or add one per whatever the objectives you have for your exam, this will be how you do that. There may be a way of doing that within chronyc. I don't remember off the top of my head if there is. There also may be a way to do that with timedatectl. I'm fairly certain with timedatectl you can add a temporary NTP server, but I'm not sure if there's a permanent flag or anything to be able to actually alter this. So especially since this is easy enough to do, just editing the configuration file here, I would do that, because remember, any configuration that you're going to have to do on your exam has to survive a reboot, and so altering the configuration file for the service is a good way of doing that. I would also recommend, if you do have to change or add NTP servers, that you include the iburst directive. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact technical definition of what's happening with iburst, but I do know that it aids with some of the initial synchronization with NTP servers, and so you'll have your system in better sync with time faster by having that as an option. So let's quit out of VI. And one other little thing I want to show you with chronyc, if you're looking at your sources, is using the -v flag. Of course, I did not spell chronyc right. There we go. And what that's going to give you is a little key to what all of this means as far as strata and pole length and such. I do know that stratum refers to the number of hops needed to be able to get to said NTP server. But I doubt that you're probably going to have to deal with stratum on the RHCSA. I may be wrong with that, but the point of this was showing that using the -v flag with chronyc will often give you much more information that'll be useful for you. So the next command I want to look at is timedatectl, which is what I use a little bit more often when I'm having to work with time. And the thing with this, you can see that the NTP service is active. You can also do that by taking a look at the chronyd service itself within systemctl to be able to see it as well. And it'll also show you a little bit of information about your time sources. If you wanted to disable NTP, you can do timedatectl set NTP to false. And what that will do, as you can imagine, will set NTP service to inactive. Also, if you happen to try to do your chronyc sources, it's going to complain that it can't talk to the daemon, and then you will also see that the service is not functioning. This, I believe, will also persist through a reboot. So if you did have an objective that says disable the NTP service, you can do it this way. I'm fairly certain of that. Or actually, we can put it to the test real quick. One thing I am curious before we do this test. Okay, so that did disable the chronyd service. All right, cool. That's in that case. Then, yeah, we really don't need to do the reboot test because we know that this is going to be disabled. Of course, we can do timedatectl set NTP true. That should re-enable the service, and it does. And then, of course, chronyc sources. We'll see our sources with that. So the last thing that I wanted to show you with timedatectl, or maybe this is the penultimate thing, but that is setting the time zone. Right now you see that it is America, New York, EST. The thing about setting the time zone with this is that you need to know the particular name of the time zone that you want to use. For example, if I were to do timedatectl set time zone, and then I just want to call it mountain, see if it will accept that. Yep, invalid time zone. So how do we figure, let's say we wanted to set this to mountain time. How do we figure that out? Well, you could do tab completion. It'll ask you if you want to see all 426 possibilities, and why not? There you go. Antarctica even has its time zones as well. There may be a list. Nope, no list option. What I would do is use the tzselect command. So if I were to do tzselect, what it will do is walk you through a wizard to figure out what would be the time zone either that you want, or help you see what the actual time zone name that there is. This is pretty similar to when you're doing a fresh install of an operating system, how you can you pick your time zone. So if I wanted to, let's say, change it to the mountain time, I would pick Americas, and then it will give me country whose clocks agree with yours. So I'll do 49 for United States. And then time zone regions, do 18 for mountain. And then let's see. And then it's going to ask you about the selected time is now the universal time. That's going to be UTC. And if the information above is okay, we say 1. Now, it does not configure your time zone, but rather it's going to give you the information that you need to be able to do that time zone. So now if I were to do timedatectl set time zone, and I do America, Denver, that should work. Let's see. Yep, there we go. We have America, Denver. And you also probably saw the time on my VM change from 2016 to 1816 because they are 2 hours behind the Eastern time. So again, for configuring your client side for NTP, there's not going to be a whole lot to do. I would suspect kind of at most you might have to set the time zone. You might need to configure an NTP server. You might need to enable or disable the NTP service, but there's good documentation for each of these commands. You have man pages. Again, in the chronyc command, you have the, if you're using the interactive shell, you have the help option to be able to get through that. So I don't foresee this for most folks being a very difficult objective to handle, but it's a good one to know about even in a non-exam kind of real world situation if you're having to configure time with your server. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed the content of the video, make sure you click like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, and also ring that bell when you subscribe. You'll both get notifications of when I have new content, and I believe it also helps YouTube with suggesting videos and such from my channel, so that would be a big help as well. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.